Lochoyo sampo pa gyo trashi pa tuche tempe tinle yar ngoda pelge drolor zampe ze parchen palden lame shabla solvade. Guru Vajradhara Suma Timo Nisha Varda Nishri Bhadra Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Suma Timo Nisha Sane Karma Uta Varda Nishri Varsa Manya Sarva Siddhi Hum Pakyuke Akudan Dagi Alu Yerme Chikto Chingi Alu Makyuke Kudan Dagi Alu Makyuke sundan dagi nga, makyuke tugdan dagi yi, tenyerme chiktu jingi lo. Om muni muni mahamuni Shakya Munye Svoha Sanshi Peke Chukshi Medo Chan Rirab Lingshe Nide Gimbo Niryata Yami Sangye Chodan Soge Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapso Chi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola Pinchira Sangye Drupareshu Sangye Chodan Soge Chonam La Chancho Pardo Dani Kyapso Chi Dagi Jinso Gibe Sonam Ki Drola pinchra sangye druparesh Sangye chodan sogi chonamla Chancho pardo dani kyapsuchi Dagi jinso gibe sonam ki Drola pinchra sangye druparesh. Nel Buddha, nel Dharma e nel Sangha prendo rifugio fino all'illuminazione. Con la pratica della generosità e delle altre perfezioni possa io ottenere lo stato di Buddha per il beneficio di tutti gli esseri senzienti. Laye ke da ludane chinke drubonda da mi kenamdam drwa kuinge dranam che tsampa thamche keto dage che ten. ¿Dónde está? ¿Pide ayuda a él? ¿Por qué no hay acá? Qué raro eso. Buonasera. Oggi mi devo innanzitutto scusare che sono venuto prima in gompa, che stavo guardando le cose di lavoro della costruzione e mi sono totalmente dimenticato che c'erano gli insegnamenti oggi. Proprio totalmente dimenticato. A un certo punto ho visto che sono tutti alzati, ho detto vabbè, finita la pugia, no? E poi ho detto, invece poi mi sono accorto un attimino dopo. Comunque sia. Adesso stiamo cercando di risolvere qualche problema tecnico dell'internet. Speriamo di riuscire a risolvere per coloro che sono a casa. Carmen, con el wifi también no va. Vajra sattva samaya manupalaya Vajra sattva tenopa Drishta didro me bhava Suyatsam sarva karma sutsame Tiyatama shriyayam kuruhum ha 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 ho bhagavan sarva tathagata vajramame munsa bhava maha samaya sattva ampe.
It's not something that I even think I should do anyway. One thing is, okay, I should clean that place, but I just don't feel like it. Another thing is saying, oh, I don't feel like I shouldn't, I don't want to clean that place, and I don't think I even should. So that's not laziness. That's just the feeling of not needing to do it. So we're not lazy when we don't do something that we don't think that we should do something. And laziness is when we think it's something that should be done, or when we know that energy should be put in that thing, effort. just don't feel like it. And my feelings and my desire. And very often we have the conflict between these two things. To go beyond laziness, it's said that the antidote to laziness is effort, and effort is defined as gelakto. So it's what is sungkang? What is effort? Gelakto. It's the joy in virtue. So effort for me means putting effort into that which is virtuous and positive with joy. But it's also not easy. One of my teachers taught me this, Geshe Tupten Leken, who was a teacher in India. Once I was studying, and I was a month and a half out to a memorization exam, and my teacher, he was also a discipline master, and he was supposed to receive us for the exam, and the minimum required for the exam is 100 pages. And he came to me and he said, in a month and a half there's the exam, the memorization exam. He said, the minimum are 50 pages back and forth. That makes 100. How many have you done? I said, in the West we're not used to memorizing by heart, and I haven't done so much. It's not easy for me, and I thought of all these excuses. And he said, no, how many? I said, okay, well, maybe of the 50 I've done 13. I thought, well, the exam that's worth, to go to the next to go to the next year is the debate exam, and I did really well in debate. So, but now I can tell you it would have been very, very useful if I had memorized more. Anyway, when I gave so many excuses as to why I hadn't memorized so much, he said, remember one thing, if you don't put effort into that which is difficult for you, where are you going to put your effort? And I thought that I was someone who put a lot of effort into my studies. I would stay in the debate sessions longer than the others. It finished at 9 p.m. and I'd stay often until 11 p.m. I'd go to lessons, I'd go to lessons, more lessons than I needed to go to, even to the higher years. I read a lot, and I did well, but I didn't like memorizing. But I also thought that I was a good student, with the exam for the debate exam, and I was among the top 10. So I had a certain amount of pride for how I studied. But then when he said to me, if you don't put effort into that which is difficult for you, where are you going to put it? That made me understand that in reality I wasn't putting effort in those things because those were things that came to me spontaneously. And at that point I memorized, like I had never done before and like I've never done after. And for a month and a half, a day and night, I memorized by heart. And I came to the exam with about 65 pages. So even more than 120 pages. So I was very, very happy for that. So, I put in the effort, but then I lacked the constancy. The months after, that's another story. Anyway, but what I learned is that when we put effort into something, we're able to do. We succeed, but it requires a lot of energy. And if I don't put effort into that which is difficult, then I'm not actually putting effort into it. So the antidote to laziness is effort. But I think it's already happened to many of us to face something that know that we should do something and we want to do it, but we're just not able. Somehow it's like, okay, it would be good to meditate more, wake up earlier, change my diet, to do this or that. but we're blocked. There's something we're not able to put effort into it.
Cosa fare a questo punto?
What do we do at that point?
Perché è facile
Because it's
solo
easy to say,
sei pigro,
oh,
devi mettere più
okay,
sforzo.
you're lazy, you should put more effort. Okay, thanks. Well, now, how can I do that? How can I manage that?
Sundru,
Sundru,
dumpa latte, dumpa
dumpa, dumpa, tebalate.
lo sforzo
Effort
nasce
it arises from aspiration
o desiderio.
or desire.
Il desiderio o
The
aspirazione
desire as
nasce
aspiration arises from faith.
perciò
So,
chi
so,
mette sforzo in qualcosa
so
prima di tutto devo
to put effort into something, I
perché
need
io
to
la
want it,
devo credere
and
nella sua esistenza.
wanting something, I need to believe in its existence. I need to believe in its qualities and benefits,
Nelle sue
in its
caratteristiche.
characteristics and qualities.
Quando io credo
When
in
I
qualcosa,
believe in
appunto
something,
io
at
lo
that point,
desidero.
I
Quando io
desire it.
desidero,
When
io
I
metto
desire it,
sforzo
I
per
put effort into obtaining
È un
it.
po' quello che si fa con
It's
la pubblicità.
it's like what happens with advertising.
Come voglio
I mean,
voler comprare il mio
how
prodotto se non so
how
neanche che il prodotto esiste?
how can I get you to buy my product if you don't even know what my product is? So first of all, you need to know that it exists. And once that you know that my product exists, you need to know its qualities.
Quindi se tu
So
avrai un prodotto
if you get this product, you see that it's going to help you here, there,
che tu
and
riesca a immaginare
so
te
that you're
stesso
able to imagine yourself with that
e a questo punto
product. And at
sviluppi
that point, you
il
develop
desiderio.
desire.
Più forte
The
la tua
stronger
voglia
your
di avere quel
desire to
prodotto,
have that product
più
is,
probabilmente
the
metterai lo sforzo di
the
mettere più
more
soldi per
effort
andare a
you'll put
comprarlo,
into
eccetera, eccetera.
putting your money towards buying that product,
Perciò
most probably.
è molto semplice.
So it's very simple.
La pigrizia si
Laziness
può risolvere
can be
con lo sforzo.
resolved with effort.
Per generare
To
sforzo io
generate
devo
to
avere
generate effort, I need to
aspirazione
have
o desiderio.
aspiration or desire. You can call them in two different ways. You need to want that thing, and to desire something, you need to know it. You need to believe in it. The word faith is not blind faith. It's understood as believing in the existence and the characteristics and the and the potential benefits of something. If it's like saying, if I'm very thirsty, to, to go far to get water, first of all, I need to desire water and recognize the qualities in water of being able to eliminate my thirst. So, but to desire water, I need to know the a place to go for it. I need to know the qualities of the water, know that it can eliminate my thirst, and then once I am have faith, and once I know the water and the place to get the water, and I have faith in water, then I can desire it. I mean, this is fundamental for all of us. A little bit joking around, and also saying a little bit what I think. I sometimes I say the main reason why we're not all Buddhas is because deeply we don't want it. Because I ask myself, how many of us wake up, how many of you wake up and thinking, I need to become a Buddha. I've got this job and that job, but no, the most important thing, I don't want to live anymore with this all permeating suffering. I have to get out of samsara and eliminate my defilements and develop my qualities because I can't stand seeing all these beings suffer anymore. I mean, I have to do something to help. I mean, how often does this happen? I mean, not even from your head, but how often does this passion come from deep inside? So the first step towards the path to enlightenment is desiring enlightenment. The first step, which is called the gateway towards the to the path, to get out of samsara, this cycle of suffering, is is desiring to get out of this cycle of suffering. It's like saying the first step in the healing process is desiring the state of good health. To desire being cured, or I don't know if you've ever tried to help someone um, um, be cured who doesn't want to be to be cured, because this process of healing is not easy. It requires changing habits. It requires going beyond one's own comfort zone. It requires effort, putting effort in one's life, and I don't put effort into something if I don't see the reason for it. So our desire is one of the most important um, um, in our lifetimes. And sometimes people ask me, what is this? In Buddhism, you shouldn't have desire. I mean, a person without desire is absolutely blocked. So on one hand, it's true. When it's said that desire should be eliminated, it's not desire in like in any of its manifestations, but it's what in Tibetan is it's considered like a desire as a mental defilement. Duchak, because the aspiration towards something, this wanting, this desiring is fundamental. Even what is translated that I personally don't like, what's translated as renunciation, a better, more precise um, Nejung or Nebachua in Tibetan, a better translation would be this definitive emergence, this certainty of being able to emerge from something, to emerge, this desire to to get out. If I'm in prison, what's the first step to get out? Is desiring to do so. You know, um, if I want to make a breakout, for example, before trying to understand how I can dig out a tunnel and all of this thing. I mean, the first thing is to develop a determination and passion and desire to get out of that place. Until I have that, I won't put the effort into planning it and putting in all that effort to actually bringing out this plan. So this first step, which is the gateway to the path, the gateway, the gateway, the gateway towards liberation, or eventually enlightenment. It's nechung, this passion for wanting to get out of this cycle of suffering. I recognize that my suffering in in my ignorance, in the incoherence between reality and how I relate to it and everything. And as a consequence, I develop selfishness and jealousy and anger and resentment and fear and envy, and that's why I suffer. And I understand that as long as I have my inner cycles of mental defilements and actions of so-called karma, I will suffer. I mean, there's no other alternative, and so I desire more than anything else is to get out of this cycle of samsara. This desire, this aspiration, this deep aspiration is what is called neju. It's called this this definitive emergence, em, em, definite emergence. It's this certainty to being able to emerge. And somehow, at some point, it was translated as renunciation, and that's the word that's most commonly used. But the concept of this, I think the idea linked to renunciation gives this idea of sacrifice, which is very different from definitive emergence. So, this in this certainty of being able to emerge, I need to also recognize suffering as suffering. I need to recognize the right cause of suffering, and I need to renounce to suffering and renounce to the causes of suffering. and there are different aspects, that are causes of suffering that we see as causes of happiness, but it's not a sacrifice that we're making. Though that um, abandoning that is not a sacrifice, because if I eat poison because I like the taste of that poison, by stopping to eat that poison, is it a sacrifice or is it an act of love towards myself, or is it a little bit? Is it both? It, they maybe it's similar to a sacrifice because it's difficult, because I like that poison, but I'm not hurting myself. I'm doing only something positive for myself. But I think within the word sacrifice gives gives this idea of suffering, the suffering or difficulty to realize something. And sometimes I I hear people say similar comments, and I think, what does that have to do with anything? Or someone says, ev- I've after all the difficulties I've passed, if I'm not going to get enlightenment, I don't know who will. As if going through difficulties, it gives you and takes you immediately to enlightenment. No, I mean, if I face difficulties and I'm able to grow from them and develop, then yes. But but it's not that suffering takes us to enlightenment, because otherwise we could do retreats. We could do suffering retreats. It'd be very easy. Like some torture, a little bit of torture, I don't know. It's just to suffer, to make us suffer a lot so we really grow, develop. But that's not the way it works. One develops himself by developing the antidote, not by taking in more poison. And no, no matter how much I know that poison is poison. So suffering is not that which makes us develop. It's, can happen that there along the path, we have difficulties, and we have difficulties that, we suffer. But this is not the right measurement to see if we're following our path correctly or not. The amount of suffering we find along the path. But my point is that desire is something fundamental. Desire understood as aspiration, wanting, attraction. So the question is, towards what? So once I was talking to somebody, and I asked this person, "Oh, do you like meditating?" And they said, "Oh, yes, very much." I asked, what meditation practices, that he did. And he says, "Oh, I did self-healing. And when I do it in the morning, I just feel so good all day long." I said, "Wonderful. So you do it every day?" "Oh, no, I haven't done it for 3 months." "Oh, why? Why?" And I asked myself, many times, why? Because there's a part of us that doesn't want it. We don't want, in the sense, sometimes we use spiritual prices, and excuse me if I'm so direct, not always and not all of us, but sometimes, and everyone looks at himself, we use spiritual practices as a tool to live our own samsara better, and not a tool to get out of samsara. I don't know if the difference is clear. We use spiritual practice as a kind of of a palliative cure, to have fewer problems in our couple, to work out problems with our father, so we can get beyond the death of someone, to have more stability at job, at work, or people. use spiritual as a spiritual uh, means also for making money. I mean, it's very common to use spiritual practices for mundane things, and there's nothing wrong with that. If it works, then 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 that's great. But it's very reduced, let's say. I mean, there's a huge difference between following following a spiritual path and using spiritual techniques for mundane reasons. I mean, a spiritual path, the objective is inner development. I mean, the objective is we ask, what is it that we want? Not just to have more stability, better to not fight so much, to have better relationships, to have objectives that are like, how can I just live more comfortably and better in my daily life? Those are not bad objectives, but they're the so-called mundane objectives, regardless how good they are. Another thing would be, objectives that go beyond this life. I want to develop love, wisdom, stability. I want to go beyond my mental defilements deeply so that I can take that with me from life to life. I want to totally get out of this cycle of mental defilements, jealousy and envy and anger, attachment, and they're caused by my ignorance. I want to get out of this so-called samsara. And so this is a deeper objective. But it's important for us to look, because what happens is that when our objective is mundane, things of this moment, what happens is that when things go more or less fine, we put less effort. Instead, when things go badly, we ask for more help. Like when I'm not well, I do practices, I try to understand things better, etc., etc. When instead I'm fine and joyous and everything goes fine as I had expected them at that point. So who wants to meditate? I just set it aside. I don't have time. Instead, it's important for us to always look ahead, look towards an inner development, because we have an objective that transcends this moment and this life. So the main point that I want to bring to you is that we need to always ask ourselves, just ask again and again, what do I want? With sincerity. And then gradually we'll see that this desire mutates. Little by little, it becomes deeper, clearer. It's not something that is just develops from one day to the next. There are moments, and then there's another point. I mean, it's not 100% white, black and white. I mean, there's a part of me that wants this, but I also want this other thing. And sometimes our desires, not to, very often, our desires are contradictory. I want to get out of samsara, yes, but I also want a comfortable samsara. And there's a percentage in our desires. I want this, but I also want this. I mean, we have various desires. So let's not worry if we see that there are incoherences, but we need to try to be sincere with ourselves and direct our desires towards to that which is of most benefit for ourselves and for others. And if we're able to do this this desire management, if we can manage our desire, then that's already a lot. It's okay, this I want, but no, it's not really what I want. I want this other thing. Have clarity about what we want. This helps tremendously. So let's not take for granted all of this. We should try to reflect on and ask and have clarity about what we want. I realized, unfortunately, once years ago, I was in Brazil, and it was a time that was really particular, a political, like social political crisis. There were lots of demonstrations in the streets at that time, and I saw that there was a lot of dissatisfaction and a lot of criticism. This is not right, and that's not isn't good. And I didn't see anyone instead who had a view of what they wanted. Like, okay, I understood what I don't want, but what is it that I would like? Very often it's easy just to criticize, but to bring an idea, a positive idea, is not easy. And at that time, I spoke to a friend who was and still is the owner of, of newspapers and weeklies. And I said, what's my dream? What's the Brazil that I want to have? It's like saying, okay, I don't want this sickness, but what is this state of health? If I don't have a reference point of what good health is, then I'll never really be able um, to um, to win over the sickness. I mean, I need to go towards health. I need to know what health is if I want to overcome my sickness. And that time, he organized a meeting with me and his journalists. There were about 40 people, and we talked about this. And what I realized during this meeting, I mean, these were people who were very, very prepared, educated. They asked wonderful questions, and I realized at that time how hard it is to dream, how difficult it is to have one's own desires, and how most of us, we desire what other people teach us that we should desire. I mean, we copy others, we follow others. A few are able to say, who are able to dream and say, I want this. Most of us, most of us don't have our own dreams. Forgive me if I say it like this, but at the end of the day, if we see Buddha Shakyamuni and many others, well, not many others, few other important people who who made a change, and many people followed them. They had a dream. They to reach enlightenment, get out of the cycle of suffering, etc. Is an objective. It's a dream. It's an objective that transcends what we're able to touch and we're able to see, and we believe in it and we follow. And one of the problems in today's world is that the dreams are missing. Dreams have been substituted by pleasure, by momentary pleasures. So it doesn't matter. It's not important to dream of of a of a of a Pacific and good society in the future. What's important is I have my own pleasures. Unfortunately, we live in a time where even like on a social level, I don't see, in not too long ago, there were like social political dreams. I mean, well, there are those who believed in one system or another group who believed in another system. I mean, there was a desire to follow this. I mean, to me, it seems like now it's just all flat. That there's no longer this desire. Once I was watching a documentary about Nietzsche, and and Nietzsche had this idea that in modern times, society would have killed God. So would have taken away the concept of God from their society. And he spoke about positive aspects, but he also said that a negative consequence would be what he called the the last man. And these last men, as a concept, it was a metaphor, and or the last men would be those who they see the star. They say how beautiful the star is, but they don't even have the, they don't even have the strength to desire wanting to reach it because it's too tiresome. So it's beautiful, but I'm not, don't, what's important is that I'm comfortable here where I am. I don't even have the strength to desire anything else. So it seems like these days this desire to transcend our um, to transcend our daily life. Um, it, it seems like there's people don't even have the effort to put effort. They don't even have the strength to put effort into trying to transcend um, their problems. What they want is pizza and Netflix, and life goes on, and the causes of our suffering just remain. So one of these fundamental point along our path is having clarity about what we want. So I leave each one of you to make your own reflection. And if we don't have clarity, then our first objective should be to have the desire, should be, to have clarity, to have an objective. It's it's a little bit like the relationship we have with material things. So for me, this relationship has changed a lot when I clarified something inside myself. When I want something. So like anything, like this object I have in front of me, this glass of water. I like it. It's nice. I want it. I'm able to have it. It gives me a sensation of pleasure. But in reality, what is it that I want? Am I attracted by the object or by that feeling of pleasure and satisfaction that I obtain through that object? What I mean, in the end of the day, what is it that we want? What are we attracted to? Do we want to feel satisfaction, peace, joy, and pleasure, or do we want the object in and of itself? We want satisfaction. So the reality around that surrounds us, objects and people, and all everywhere we project our happiness. In reality, what we actually want is not the object, but it's that feeling of pleasure. And the object is nothing other than a tool to help us reach that feeling of satisfaction and pleasure. But it doesn't depend on that object. The object in its interaction can help, but it doesn't depend exclusively on the object. It can't by itself can't give us the satisfaction and pleasure. It's what's fundamental is the value that we give to it. Just look at the example of money. If I come and I give you a 500 euro bill, would that make you happy? You'd say, thanks, nice. But what happened if at a certain point I say that this has no more value, as it happened in India? In India, it's just if something particular happened, which has a kind of also a beautiful side to it. One day, a few years ago, the Prime Minister Modi just said that It was 8 o'clock at night. He went on national TV. He said, from midnight tonight, all bills greater than this amount are no longer longer valid. It's like saying, okay, after 20 euros, any bill greater than 20 euros has no value. And so you had like 2 weeks or 3 weeks to go to the bank and put that money into your bank account. But you could you could you could do that like up to 1,500 euros without justifying where you got that money. After that, after that, if you put in the money without being able to justify it, without being able to justify it, you had to pay you had to pay 200%. Um, um, and there were like rivers and rivers of money in the streets because people were just throwing it away, and cows were actually eating these bills. And so with that, in one clean swipe, he was able to take away all the he was able to clean up, let's say, all the black money. It was very courageous what he did, but it made it for months. Of India was quite in a lot of chaos. But the point is that once something had a tremendous value that gave a lot of joy, and then from one minute to the next, it has no more value. So what determines whether that piece of printed paper has value or not? Just the value that is attributed by the collective. On our individual level, it's the same thing, well, regarding any object. If that object actually is important to me, the value it has, the value it doesn't have, that depends on the value we attribute to it. A marvelous example is that study that was done with the monkeys and the cucumber and the grape. I've told this story a couple times. There's given, there's like there's a stone is given to a monkey, and the monkey gives it back, and he gets a cucumber, and they repeated that like 50 times, until he's totally full and he's happy every time he gets a cucumber. There are two monkeys face to face with glass in between. So the monkey's given the stone, gives back the stone, he gets a cucumber, he's happy, and then that next monkey um, gives gets the monkey gives back the stone, and instead of a cucumber gets a grape. So it's very happy, even happier. So then they go back to the first monkey. They give him a stone. The stone is given back, and then instead of getting the grape, he gets the cucumber again. And so when this monkey sees that he doesn't get the grape like the other monkey, he goes absolutely crazy and doesn't want the cucumber anymore. He throws it away, tries to pound on the he just doesn't want to have anything to do with the cucumber. But I asked myself, what determines the value of the cucumber? Is it have an intrinsic characteristic of this cucumber, or is it the value that is attributed to it? And the one attributed to it, if the monkey had not seen the other monkey with the grape, he would still be happy with the cucumber he was receiving. If each one of us was just happy with our cucumber, with what we have, then life would be easier. This is one of the problems that mass communication has created. Before, the various class levels were more divided. And so you saw you saw, people of your same social class, and so you compared yourself to those like you. But today, instead, I have I'm at a certain level, but I'm constantly seeing unreachable things, through TV and films. It's like, I'm constantly seeing grapes and mangoes and whatever it is, but I'm there with my cucumber, but there's nothing wrong with cucumbers. What determines the value is the value that's assigned, is attributed. So when we ask ourselves what we want, even talking about material things that we have, the time that we have available, I see people. It's interesting to see when two people meet. Let's say maybe people know each other, and maybe they don't know each other that well, but I'm a little bit, or if I see someone, I don't really know them, but I have a kind of desire for that person. Oh, and then, one day that person smiles at me. Oh, that feels so good. 2 days being really happy, just this image of a smile. And then I'm able to speak to that person. Oh, that person says something sweet to me. Oh, how wonderful. 3 days of happiness. Then we give each other a hug. A week of happiness. I can't wait to see that person again, because that hug lasts only so long. But the little by little, you know, the closer we get, that smile is not enough. The hug is not enough, you know, and you know, and before being together for an hour, now an hour's not enough. Now I need 5 hours, you know, until we get to the point where I think that the person needs to be the way I think he or she should be, like that. But what determines whether the amount of time you dedicate to me is a lot or a little? Is that something intrinsic, or is it just the value that I attribute to it? It's the value that I give. So, one clear aspect that the more I want, the less I have. The more dissatisfied I am. The the less I want, the more I have, because I give more value to things. Things naturally take on more value. And when we're able to understand deeply within ourselves that what I want is satisfaction, what I want is pleasure, and what determines this lever of satisfaction and pleasure is not how much I have, but it's the value that I give to what I do have. It totally changes the dynamics. I remember once I was left me a little bit like this. It was my birthday, and I received for my birthday from somebody, a friend, I received a vajra, this object, this ritual object, this dolce vajra in solid gold. It's big like this. My first impact was, wow. It was done by the artist who made dorjes also for the Dalai Lama. It really was a work of art also with an enormous value. And I said, wow, how beautiful. So I received this, and at first I thought, wow, this really I'm what this is nice. But then I get home and I said, what am I going to do with this? And then I put it on my altar. It was me and this vajra, and I thought, And I was there and I thought, what determines that this has value or not? The function it has for me. Because my logic is, the things The things that I possess need to be at my service. They need to have a service because to have them, just to have them, it has is has no, there's no sense, because if I have things just to have them, then I'm at the service of these objects, and my life gets used up by taking care of these things. And life goes by, and I'm there cleaning and taking care and protecting. I'm sad because it was broken, or because it was taken, or I leave it at home. I'm afraid that robbers are going to come. I mean, I'm just going to open and close a parenthesis very quickly. I think the most precious that I have in my life, the most precious thing is my inner peace. Is my state of being. It's the time that I live. If someone comes and takes something from my house and doesn't hurt anybody, let it be of benefit to the one who took it. And that's a lot, it's worth a lot less than, being consumed with the fear of someone coming in and taking something. This happened at the monastery in India. It happened. There was an old monk, and 3 times they came into his room, and they broke his door. They broke his closet, to steal from him. And during great ceremonies, this happened, like during great ceremonies where everyone was at the ceremony. This kind of thing could happen. And so 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 when so these days that there was maybe this risk of robbers, he would just open he would just leave the door open, leave the closets open. So he thought, well, if somebody breaks in, at least I don't have to then fix the closets and the doors. So what I mean to say is the fear of someone coming in takes a lot more from me than the object that's taken. Often I don't know if that's clear. So what I mean to say is that if I have something, and having that thing, creates a fear in me, it's better not to have it. Or I need to have it in a way that it doesn't generate fear, because my inner peace is too important. So to have something just to have it is not a good reason. It's it's a reason when it's a good reason when that object has a function. So when I was face to face with this golden vajra, I asked myself, what function does it have for me? So, okay, it has this religious, ritual function, yes, but I have other vajras, and so, you know, so what's the difference whether it's in gold or in plastic? Okay, gold shines, but I remember being in front of the object and saying, okay, it has this particular value, if I wanted to sell it. So what changes really? So, and I had no intention of selling it. So after a while, a few months later, Trisha Rinpoche came, and I found the right use for it. I gave it to him. It was the most precious object that I had, and I was so happy to find a real use for this object, by giving it to him. So the point is, the value that things have depends on the value that we attribute to them. So having more things doesn't mean having more, doesn't mean being more satisfied, because having this depends, I repeat again, depends so much on the value that we attribute to these things. So the worth of something is something that is often depends on a comparison. The time we have together, is it a lot or a little? What determines whether it's a lot or a little? how do we judge whether that's a lot of time or a little bit of time? It's a comparison. So this often this reference point of comparison is um, is so so it's so, for example, if we see each other every day, 1 hour together is not a lot. If we see each other once a year, then 1 hour together is a lot. If I'm going to die tonight, 1 hour is a tremendous amount of time. So often this an idealized image. This it's not something realistic or concrete where we say, okay, something that exists, but big or small or the lot or little is nothing other than the attributed values based on comparisons that are absolutely relative. And but what's good for me? Does it is it what is good for me to feel like I have a little or that I feel like I have a lot? It's better feeling that I have a lot. And what determines how that thing being a lot or a little, to the value that I attribute to it. So it's important to reflect a little bit on what I want, what I have. And then little by little, this shows us that the reins, that we can take the reins in our hands and we can determine this for ourselves. She's saying you made the analogy with the object, having that object creates. She's saying it's a question. Asking to maybe repeat the question. Let's see. So the question was, so there was the analogy about having an object on which we have desire, for which we have desire or attachment. We have attachment to this object, and this generates a fear of losing it. And often, what we want more is to have peace. So in certain cases, it's better just to not have it and to be in peace. But this also depends on many factors. So how she asked if you can have an analogy like this also with relationships, because there are relationships, relationships that there are aspects that I like, but there's also fear of losing it or other aspects, related to the relationship. So let's go back to the first analogy. Start with the first analogy. If I have 20 pieces garments, 20 pieces of 20 outfits, and there's one that I really like more than the others, but actually I'm really afraid of someone stealing it, and I never put it because I'm afraid that if I wear it, it's going to get ruined or get stained, and so it just generates a lot of anxiety inside of me. And it's at that point better not to have it, I'd say, but there's but let's say, for example, I live in a place where there's not a lot of food, and I need food to eat, but 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 having food generates fear in me, fear that someone could come and or can rob me. But I need the food, you know. So I I need to. At that point, I put energy into going beyond and learning how to get beyond that fear, because I need the food. So what I want to say is that often things are not black and white, all good or all bad. I see this in interpersonal relationships. It's very common, there are aspects that are positives that are good for us, where there's positive interactions, and then there are difficult aspects that make us suffer or generate fear, etc. I mean, this is very common. So if I have a relationship with someone where I see there are positive aspects and there are aspects also negative, and so one thing to see above anything else is to weigh it, and you know, and there's something else to say, which is weigh it in the sense of to put it on a scale. Here, how can I say this clearly? Let's just let's just stop here for a second and go take and get to and and go to it from another side. So everything we talked about before that had to do with the importance of desiring is also to understand that desire is not necessarily something bad. To desire is about directing our energy, setting a goal, an objective. But what happens is that very often we have desire with attachment. And we see that attachment generates suffering inside of us. And so to not something often is to not suffer, we want to move away from that object because we see that this attachment hurts us, is harmful. So how can I have desire towards something without having attachment? How can I relate with an object of desire without dissatisfaction so that it is something positive? Because it's quite natural and spontaneous inside of us. That is that when we see positive aspects, when there's something that we like, it's natural to spontaneous to want it, and then when we have it, we're happy, and when we don't have it, we're upset. And when we have it for a while, after a while, we want something else. This threshold of satisfaction. Dissatisfaction then grows. So, an important point is that the one thing is having pleasure with something, or like I'm happy to be with you. I'm happy to eat this, or to live this situation, or this other situation. The problem mainly comes when we create our own image, an idealized image of how, according to us, how things should be. So what happens is that not only do I have the pleasure in having this thing, let's take the metaphor of the glass of water. So I have this glass of water and I expect to always have this water. I expect tomorrow to find this same glass of water and to have the water as I had before. What generates suffering or conflict in this case is not having the water, but the fact of expecting having this expectation that the water should always be there for me, that I should always have it the way I always have, and I imagine myself in that situation. I imagine myself with the water, and when it doesn't happen like that, then I'm disappointed, I'm upset. I've seen very often, I saw this with Rinpoche, this characteristic, marvelous characteristic, and in Self-Healing 3, Rinpoche talks about this. He says, enjoy with no attachment, he says, which means I can recognize the qualities, I can have the pleasure in drinking the water, but I don't have attachment in having it, or rather, I'm aware that it's out of my control. When it's there, good. When it's not there, I thank. I am thankful and grateful for what was, but I'm aware that I don't have this control of over having or not having. It doesn't depend exclusively on me, and it's not the fault of the other. Because often what generates the suffering is not um, what generates suffering is grasping at an idea of the, grasping at the idea that things should be the way I see them, or this option should be the way I think it is. So one thing is recognizing the good and the pleasure in this relationship that I have with this person. We're talking, regardless of the type of relationship. Another thing is when I start generating expectations of how this person should treat me, how much attention this person should give to me or time dedicate to me, when I dedicate when when I have this idealized image of how things should be. And so when the things don't come, they don't turn out the way we expect, you know, um, you know. So when, say I'm not inventing anything, I just want things to be the way they already are. But things are not always the same. They're in constant transformation. So what happens is that I create an idealized image, and our mental images are always idealized. And I create an image of how the other is, what kind of relationship we have, how much attention or I should have. And it's not such a conceptual process where I'm imagining, we saw each other today. What do I expect? I expect tomorrow the same thing. And if you don't, today you don't smile at me like you did yesterday, then I get upset. One thing is saying I like it when you smile at me, which is good. And another thing is being upset when you didn't smile at me because I think that you should smile at me. And yesterday you smiled at me. I mean, I don't know if this difference is clear. So what generates suffering, what generates conflict is not the pleasure of your smiling at me, but it's the attachment of the idea of, since you smiled at me yesterday, then you should smile at me today, and you should also smile at me tomorrow. And if you don't, then I look at how come and what the problem is, etc. So there's nothing wrong with having objectives, having desires, even when we for, for spirituality, desire is fundamental. The problem is when we give it a form and time. Like once we do that, then we say, oh, it didn't happen how I thought it was, how it was supposed to happen, or when it was supposed to happen, and we start becoming disappointed because it's not matching our expectations of time and form. So there's a difference of like having pleasure in something and having attachment for that same thing. These are two different things. Attachment very often is much closer to an idealized image than to the actual person or object. And what generates suffering is that very often the person, the situation, the object doesn't correspond to the idealized image, you know. Um, with the idealist image that we have created. And so to not suffer, not knowing how to distinguish these two things, I create distance. So I don't want it anymore. I don't want to see you anymore. I like your smile, but because you don't smile at me every day, then, better just not to see you at all. But what makes me suffer? The fact that you smile at me, or the fact that I have an expectation, that I'm grasping to an idealized image where I think that you should be smiling at me when I want. I mean, I don't know if the difference between these two is clear. On a practical level, it's not so easy to make this distinction, but at least let's shed some light on it. So personally, I've had many experiences where there were situations that I liked, and I started to see that what was generating suffering in me is when they didn't correspond to my expectations, to my own projections. There was it wasn't a problem that I liked those things. The problem was that I was attached to my own imagination of how I thought the mental image of how things should be. And often we don't take this into account. Maybe somebody could ask, well, how can I set an objective without attachment? Because if I have an idealized image, but then it doesn't happen, I mean, like I like your smile, and I like your smile, and then you don't smile at me. How can I make it? How can I make you smile at me again? I mean, what I mean to say is, it's right to put energy. It's right to put energy into what we think is beneficial. And if I think that you're smiling at me is beneficial, then I put effort into getting you to smile at me. But the more attached I am to that result, then the more upset I will be when it doesn't happen as I expected. And it's not easy, but we should put energy into a direction without expectations. We've talked about this many times. Have high objectives, and a high objective and a low expectation and constant effort. So this objective is this desiring, is the wanting, recognizing the benefit, recognizing all the positive aspects of beauty in it. The expectation is when I put that into an idealized image of how we think it should be. And this constant effort is remembering that, I don't know how, but I just constantly know that's what I want, and so I'm going to constantly put effort into it until I get it. So, here, like round and round, we're always faced with the same thing, which is our own ignorance of seeing phenomenon as if they existed intrinsically and relating to them accordingly. Because I project, that you should behave in this way, and I don't think that it's my own projection. I think that it's you. And if you don't act like that, you're wrong. But I've created it. I've created it all. I've created the idea of how you're supposed to act, and then I'm upset because you don't act the way I think that you should act. I don't know if it's ever happened to you where someone has created an expectation for you to act in a certain way, and then the person and then creating conflict. The conflict comes out with this person when you act differently. But in the end, it was all created in the mind of the other. So anyway, no matter what happens, we don't have this ability from one day to the next to make everything clear. It's something that if we put energy in the right direction, then gradually it comes. How can I say? It's very important to know how to distinguish between attachment. So this projecting of an idealized image and pleasure. Recognize the recognizing the, the if we're not able to if we're not able to distinguish between these two things, then we're going to create distance between the things that are beneficial to us too. For example, the relationship we have with our own guru. I've seen this with Rinpoche. Lama Gangchen, he's someone who had this marvelous ability. I mean, one would sit next to him, and that was just it. Everything was fine. You didn't need anything else. I mean, I've seen it for myself, and I've seen other people just sit next to him, and that was it. Didn't need anything else. You were there, and then it depended on how long you were there. It's not that he, had changed everything in you. But when you were there, everything was fine. But obviously, I've seen many dynamics in myself and in other people of attachment. He smiled to me, didn't smile to me. He looked at me, didn't look at me. Look at there's that and that person. How come yesterday was like this? And instead, he said, and why didn't he say? And he said, and etc. etc. I mean, I've seen this. I saw so many times. But what I saw was that the benefit that he brought in just his friendship, his closeness, his love was much greater than the conflict that someone would generate based on their own projections and idealized images and expectations. So we need to have this clarity that the problem is not the water. The problem is the idealized image that I project on how and when and why. And that's what generates my own dissatisfaction. So if I have a relationship with someone who guides me, who teaches me, and because it would be important for all of us to relate mostly with people who possibly that have qualities that have more qualities than we do. If not, or you know, so we should try to get close to people who have characteristics that we want to develop. But this doesn't mean that all relationships are always peaceful or perfect. No matter who we get close to, I mean, there's something else to say. I mean, we're always going to be projecting our own things onto anyone, and sometimes people like to stay far instead of projecting their own, their own problems onto others. But that doesn't work either. We need to remember important things. One is One thing is attachment. Another thing is recognizing qualities and this aspiration towards the fact that I recognize that water is good for me, that the presence of my guru is good for me. When I talk like Rinpoche, for example. I mean, the presence of him in my life is seeing that as beneficial. That's one thing. Another thing is the expectations of how much, the projection, my own projections on how much time he spends with me or dedicates to me. I mean, those kinds of projections generate conflict and suffering. And so it's and that's and that has nothing to do with how beneficial it is to stay in his company, for example. We need to be able to distinguish. It's very important for us to be able to do that, make that distinction. And there's something else to say, that no matter who's in front of me, no matter the situation in front of me, the world around me is always a mirror, my own mirror, a mirror of myself, reflection of myself. We're incapable of living any situation or in, relating with any person independently of the filter of ourselves. And as um, so, according to our own processes, our own dynamics, we see the others and everything around us with a certain filter. And it's not easy, but the closer we get, I mean, the thicker our filter is, and we need to be careful about this. Remember that no matter who it is, I mean, sooner or later our own dynamics are going to be projected on, and that's not a problem. And for example, my relationship with Rinpoche was what I saw. I mean, how many times did I see people project everything, anything and everything onto him? But what they projected onto him, he wouldn't. Um, he wouldn't. There was no reaction against, because if you project some kind of problem onto me and I answer you and I get into that energy, into that dynamics, then that is going to create many other problems. But if you project on something onto me and there's no answer, I don't get into that energy, I don't get into that dynamics, I don't, once you stop projecting, then it just ends there because there's no reaction. So what's important on our side is to remember that inevitably we are going to project ourselves onto situations and people, or maybe moments of tension or of dissatisfaction or from our fears, our sense of loneliness. And the closer we get to someone, it's normal that the more we project. But we need to remember that these are our own projections. It's absolutely normal. Then gradually separate the things and and know how to see the other person as a mirror. And when we're able to distinguish what comes and what is reflected by me, which and that's really important. I don't know if that's clear, but then that's really positive, being able to do that. If we were to move away from everything for which we have attachment, because that attachment is harmful, then we will continue to generate attachment to other things, even things that are positive to us, because it's not just by moving away from the object of attachment that my attachment disappears, because then we're just going to project that attachment onto something else. Instead, when we find people and situations and places where that interaction helps us grow, is positive situations that help us, that they better us, people who have beautiful qualities, we should keep this like a treasure, remembering that there's attachment, there's jealousy, yes, there's envy, yes, there's fear, yes, because I'm in the middle of my own samsara. I'm here. If there's someone, for example, my relationship with Rinpoche, there's my guru, and I see that in the end I'm projecting my own jealousy or my own fears or my envy or anything like that. And I say, okay, because I don't want to have these projections, it's better to not have a guru. At that point, what happens? Then I stay without a guru with all of these mental defilements of jealousy and envy and fear. So it's important that that the other is always a mirror for me, and distinguish. So, and where we recognize positive situation, we should keep them like a treasure, remembering that there will be moments there'll be difficult times, there'll be moments of fear or anger or attachment, or envy. But when we feel these feelings, when we have these feelings towards other, let's remember that the other is really a mirror for ourselves, and that those feelings are going to pass. What's important is a relationship with another person. Mid and long term should help us grow, and and recognize the positive qualities. You know, and the positive qualities of the other should help us develop these qualities in ourselves. So whether it's pleasurable or not, you know, the the value of a relationship is not determined on whether it's pleasurable or not, but on whether interacting is helping me grow. There there are other relationships actually. Um, the other relationships can also, the interacting can reinforce negative habits. In that case, it's better to move away. Um, other relationships that are not easy, but they strengthen my good sides and help me develop my positive qualities. So this is a beneficial relationship. Now, the the more idealized the image that we have of a relationship, the more difficult it's going to be. If it's the more detailed this idealized image is, the the more solid it becomes, and the more difficult the relationship will be. You know, what's difficult is that maybe at the beginning it seems as if this idealized image sustains itself, as if it has materialized, and it's actually happening, but then it falls apart. And this is with everything. I see this constantly. Even taking care of the construction of the temple, for example, or anything. You say something, you project, you draw, you talk, and then of course you can't make a project without imagining the result. I mean, im- but tell me, how often does the the image of what you have the, uh, imagine, how does it actually materialize perfectly? It corresponds every once in a while, but instead, when it doesn't correspond, we need to adapt, without complaining, and saying, oh, because you didn't see this and it was supposed to be like that, and I had said this and you didn't do and you didn't say, and why? Because remember that life goes on, and we don't want to use our energy for this kind of thing. I, I don't know if this is clear, in the sense that if I'm doing something and it doesn't correspond, you know, how can I better the situation? It's useless to go back and blame and cry, and because you didn't say and you didn't do, etc. I mean, an example for me that really touched me, like how to direct myself. It was years ago when we made the ceiling for the temple. When I made the ceiling, so now we see all the mandalas. they're they're done with a particular system, and I'm not going to bore you with all these with all the technical details. So anyway, together with someone else, we invented this system, and it needed a special screw. And when they put it up, I remember Trisha Rinpoche was supposed to come here. If maybe it wasn't, it was around Easter, and it was the he. Everything needed to be finished on a certain date. So I had done um, um, my whole chrono program, my my whole calendar, you know. So it's all going quite well, and it got to the point. It got to the part where it was time to put in those special screws. So the person said, "I'm sorry, my supplier, you know, who normally um, who supplies everything perfectly, he gave the wrong screws. So let's try." So so of the like 8 screws, 5 weren't working, and at that point I said, you know, what do we do? I had my deadline. You know, I I asked, you know, everything at the right time. These are professional people, someone I trusted. I mean, everything was you know, I started calling everyone. Um, I started calling everyone who did all the suppliers of these kind of screws, you know. And then there was this one company in Switzerland. Actually, no, the screws that I needed, they made them in Switzerland, and and they could only sell to within Switzerland, or like, and I said, well, I have Swiss friends, you know. I explained everything, you know, we're making a temple, etc. So they said, come here. So I drove for 8 hours. I got there at night. I drove through the night. In the morning, I was there at the factory, and they saw me. They thought I was very strange. They gave me 2 boxes of screws, and in the end, they make me pay for them. They just gave them to me because you could see that they weren't. I mean, they weren't even. They couldn't even sell them. You know, they saw that I drove all the way from Italy to get these these 2 boxes, and so in the end, you know, we used these screws, and everything worked perfectly. But the point is that at that moment when I found myself in that situation where things were not going the way I had programmed, then it was useless to use my energy to complain and blame. Instead, it was better to put energy in the solution, because if there's a solution, you know, we 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 turn away from the program. And so I'm not there saying, oh, you, because you said this and you said, no, what do I want? What do I want? I want to put up the mandalas in the right time. I have my deadline. I mean, this was the solution that I had, so I'm not there to waste my time to go over, you know, who should have done what. It's just useless. So when there's a situation, what creates the suffering is that I have an idealized image of something that should have happened, you know, in this time and in this way. It didn't happen that way because because I had an image that didn't correspond with all the aspects, the interactions with all the other situations and people. So instead, you know, I look towards what I can do. I look towards the solution when I'm in a situation like that. So there's this kind of magic to imagine, but without being attached to one's the own image, because dreaming and imagining and wanting, desiring is very, very important, but without being attached to the image that we generate, without being attached to our object of desire. So we enjoy without attachment. I don't know if that's clear. When we're able to enjoy our object of desire without attachment, when it ends, then we're happy to have had that experience. I mean, if I drink the water with joy, um, and without projections of of needing to always have the water and having the water the way I want it. No, if without attachment, when the water finishes, then I'm happy for that enjoyment that I had. Of course, um, of course, there's this happiness of thinking that maybe I could have it in the future. But if I have attachment, then I, when I'm not even finished with the water, I'm already suffering because it's finishing. Or when it's finished, then I'm just really upset because one wasn't enough. I should have had two. But what generates the pain and the suffering is not the water; it's the attachment to this idealized image of how I think it should be. But let's just repeat one more time. It's it's not easy. It's an art form to have images that project, to direct, to desire something without attachment on how we think things should be. It's possible. We need a little bit of experience, practice, but this is the direction that I think is important to go. One of the first times that I had a strong experience with this was when one of my masters, Gangchen, Lobsang Rinpoche, one of these, um, he was one of the gurus of Lama Gangchen. He was the abbot of a monastery, and I knew him for just a short time. I knew him in 1993 before, but closer in 1993. I went into India in 1994, and around like in 1995, actually, he passed away. It was a short amount of time that I knew him, but it was very intense. Every meeting was very intense. It was someone who was actually fundamental in many aspects of my life, and I remember very, very well. I remember when I learned about his passing, I was sitting at home where I was at home, and I received a letter in Tibetan. I, would, I had a hard time reading, and someone helped me, and I saw that he had passed away. And one thinks, like in modern times, one would receive a call, or no. Instead, I received the news by mail, and I remember this impact of sadness because I wanted to receive more teachings from him. I wanted to be closer to him. I had lots of projects, and plans with him. He was supposed to come to Borobudur that year to give the initiation of Kala Chakra, who he had done actually a retreat on it specifically so that he could then give, impart this empowerments. But then at a certain point I realized that what was making me suffer was not really his passing, but it was that I was expecting things that were not going to materialize. And then I started to remember beautiful things and having gratitude for the beautiful moments that I had lived with him and what I received from him. And that brought me a marvelous sense of joy. So the fact I cried a lot that day. I was very sad. I remember a few months later when Rinpoche came to the monastery of Tashilumpo, um, um, and Rinpoche went into his room, and it was the only time where I saw Rinpoche cry like a baby. I mean, also for him, it was someone who was very important to him. So there was also sadness, but it was transformed into joy, into gratitude. But it was something immediate. But it was something that was directed, but also sincere. So what generates suffering is not the fact that there's something that we like that at a certain point is no longer there. What generates suffering is our expectations and our projections on this idealized image of how things should be and how long it should last. But when there's desire and pleasure without attachment, when it's over, there's the joy of it having been. There's not the suffering of it not being any longer. With objects it's important, but with people even more so. But let's remember, just to conclude, that with people, what generates more suffering is this attachment to this idealized image that we have. Objects change. And let's say that people change even a lot more. I mean, we're in constant movement, transformation, one day one way, the next in another. And we see everything through our own reality. Today you smiled at me because you love me. Tomorrow you don't smile at me because you don't love me anymore. Maybe I smiled at you the other day because I was thinking of something else and has nothing to do with you. And maybe I'm not smiling at you today because it has nothing to do with you. I just woke up a little bit on the wrong side of the bed. Often we think things have to do with us, but that's another subject. So let's try to relate with others and not with the idealized image that we have of others. Let's try to enjoy what we have without the attachment of how much and how and when. What we receive. This is something very important. Okay, this time let's make our dedications for today.
Rapten chi namkara tinle chochur gepadang losan tempe drume sasum ki drove munsel takto ne gyur chi kewa kunto yanda lamadang dralme cheki pela longche chi Sada lamgi yente rabzone dorje change kopa nyur tobeshon. Nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan delekshin. Nintzen takto delekpe koncho sumke jingilo. Concho sumke ngodrubatsol, concho sumke tashisho. All'alba o al tramonto, di notte o durante il giorno, possano i tre gioielli concederci le loro benedizioni, possano aiutarci ad ottenere tutte le realizzazioni e cospargere il sentiero della nostra vita con molti segni di buon auspicio. Grazie a tutti.